There are many famous steelhead and salmon rivers on the West Coast, from the Skamania to the OP and down to the Northern California streams. But are you aware of the great waters of Southwest Washington and the good numbers of summer and winter steelhead they hold? Today we're going to take a deep dive into this area so you have a better chance at finding some of the big steelhead and salmon this year. This is the Wet Fly Swing Podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. How's it going? I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing Podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid, grew up around a little fly shop, and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers and guides than just about anyone out there. Jackson Golik, guide in Southwest Washington and beyond, is going to walk us through the Kalama, the Cowlitz, the Lewis, a bunch of the famous steelhead rivers in the western part of Washington. We're going to find out how he worked for this old grease-lined fly shop, which was the oldest fly shop at the time. Harry Lemire, we talk about Simon Gawesworth. He's got a connection there as well. You're going to discover how to time your trips based on conditions, how to avoid some of the busier areas and what to be thinking about, and some tips, some of his best tips for swinging steelhead on the surface and below. Plus, you're going to find out how to find and hook up with coho on the fly and why you should be thinking about this year. So coho is not just an Alaska species. We're going to talk about it here as well. I'm really excited to get this one going. Here we go. Jackson Golik at Jackson Golik on Instagram. Hey, how you doing, Jackson?
Hey, Dave. Great. Fantastic.
Nice. We're going to chat a little bit on, straight up, we're going to talk Portland Fly Shop a little bit because Jason's a good guy down there. We're also going to get into some on Southwest Washington, probably focusing on steelhead, maybe a little on salmon. And we might even touch on the Deschutes a little bit today. But before we get there, how are things going?
Oh, fantastic. The weather kind of settled in and, having to reschedule a few trips now. But luckily the season's it's coming to an end for summer steelhead. We've got a few more days on the books, but winters are around the corner.
Yeah. Where's your summer steelhead? Where do you get fired up for summers?
So I work a couple for summers. It depends on the time of year. So we'll start the season and it gets good consistently in like mid-June, in which case I'll be on like the Kalama or the Cowlitz or the Lewis. And then I work the Clickett's as well. And that depends on, the last couple of years has been blowing out really easily, more than normal. This year was actually really good, but some years it starts in, I'll work the early season in early June, and then other seasons it'll start in September. Most of the time it's October, November though.
Yeah, October, November. And then do you transition in for when does the winter steelhead start for you?
Kind of year by year, depending on conditions. I mean, the earliest ones we've ever caught have been, the week before Thanksgiving. But I'd say consistently it starts getting good around like the first week of December for hatchery fish. And then it kind of tapers. We start getting the first like good push of wild fish right around Christmas. So like the end of December. It kind of depends though. Like any river that you're fishing below Bonneville, they have very kind of unique fish. Like, you'll get really small pushes, and then your normal season is just like anybody else's normal season, where you're talking middle of January through the middle of April.
That's it. Nice. Well, this is going to be good today because I think, you mentioned a few rivers, the Cowlitz, Kalama, all those. It's Southwest Washington, I think, goes under the radar a little bit. When you look kind of nationally, I think a lot of people think of the OP, the Skamania, maybe even some of the California rivers, Northern California. But I think the Southwest Washington, do you feel like it's kind of under the radar a little bit out there or not as well known from what you do?
Yeah, in different circles. The fly fishing crowd, not as much. It has a heavy conventional crowd. It's a lot like the Oregon coast. So it's not like it's void of pressure by any means. If anything, the people are extremely fishy, and you have to be very aware of the conditions that you're given and kind of how to manage the pressure to get them consistently on flies. But it could be really good for sure. And we have a lot of different options, which is nice. It kind of disperses pressure evenly.
Yep. And I'm sure, that's really cool. So this is going to be good. We're going to dig into all this. Let's take it back real quick on just your background. I'd love to hear that a little bit. How'd you get into this? When did fly come? Kind of what's your first memory?
Yeah. I was born into it. So my dad guided up on the bow in Calgary through college.
Oh, cool.
So I kind of knew that guiding was a career option early, but I was a shop bum for a long time. I worked for the line for Mark Noble for a couple of years.
Which one was that?
The Grease Line. It was one of the oldest fly shops in the Pacific Northwest. So he employed Harry Lemire.
Wow, where was that at?
He passed away, but it was in Vancouver.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Vancouver, Washington, or Canada?
Yeah. Sorry, Vancouver, Washington.
Wow, that's amazing. So the Grease Line or the Grease Liner?
Grease Line.
Yeah. That's amazing. And so when did that shop close down? When were the times you were working there?
That would have been, I think 2017.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it was going a long time.
Oh yeah. It was in business for I think 42 years. Like I said, Mark claimed that it was the oldest fly shop in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah. So what year would it have started?
It started in the early 80s, late 70s.
Okay. Late 70s. There you go. So that definitely would have been, back in the 70s, there weren't a lot of fly shops.
No. And it was cool. There was pictures of him and, some of the first editions of Salmon Trout Steelhead with him, holding this big old thing that he caught from a Washougal. And it was an institution for sure. There was a lot of people that, you bring up the Grease Line, and if they have any connection to, kind of northern Oregon and southwest Washington, fished it since the 70s or 80s. They knew where the Grease Line was.
Right. That's amazing. Cool. So this is good. This is a good start. I always love getting into a little bit on the history on this. And so are there fly shops now? Are there any out in Southwest in that area?
I want to say there's one up in Castle Rock, but it's like...
Yeah, it's not a full fly shop.
No. I think that it's mostly like a guide outfit.
Okay.
That they might sell some flies or something outside. But yeah, and it's like I said, I've never actually visited it. But no, in short, no, not any real fly shops.
Okay. So that's it. So you were working in the Grease Line, and then where did it take you from there?
Yeah. So I was tying flies commercially for them. So I got paid by the hour to tie just a ton of glow bugs, essentially, and steelhead caddis. But then because I live in Battleground, I was working there for probably a year and a half or 2 years. I was like a freshman in high school, and Mark was like, "Hey, there's a guy that moved to Battleground. He's kind of a big deal in the fly fishing industry." I was like, he told me the name, and it kind of went over my head. I didn't think anything of it. Well, I was kind of sitting there, and my mom comes in, and she's like, "Hey, I met this really cool guy. His name is Simon, and he says he works for a fly fishing company." I was like, "Oh, cool." So it turned out to be Simon Gawesworth, and
Sure.
I met him, and I was like, "Oh, this guy's fantastic." And, we talked about fishing for a long time because he was new to the area, and he wanted to learn about, kind of where he could go fish and all that kind of stuff. And I was fishing one day, and I saw him. Like, I saw his car and his rod rack and everything. So I'd been fishing all day. We didn't hook anything. It was early winter steelhead. We go out there, and I was like, "Oh, shoot, I'd been fishing all day." And I saw him, and I was like, "Oh, I'll go down and hang out with him if he'll have me," essentially. And go down, and he ends up getting like the first winter steelhead of the season. It was this big, beautiful native fish. We took a bunch of pictures of it and stuff, and it got me a job. I was his kind of assistant for a little bit north of 6 months, working for Rio. So I was doing a lot of like fly line box modifications and stuff, and doing all their social media for Rio for a while. So I worked for Rio for a little bit, kind of as an intern. And then from there, I worked for the Royal Treatment for a tiny, tiny bit, which is where I met Nick Wheeler. And then I worked for the Portland Fly Shop. And then eventually Nick Wheeler came on board with the Portland Fly Shop because of our connection and through a couple other connections. So it's been really cool. The fishing scene in Portland and South Washington and all that kind of stuff is pretty small, and it's really cool to know most of the people in the industry that have been in it for a long time.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah, that is kind of cool. It flies. Yeah, it's kind of small, flies on the radar, but a lot of people listening might not know it either. But It's kind of a hub for the fly rods. You look at Lama glass. If you go, we just had Chris Korich on, who talked about a lot of the history of fly rods, and Don Green, Jim, all these big names who basically got us to where we are came from that part. Lama glass, G. Loomis, right? You had Echo with the Ray Jeff brothers, Steve Ray Jeff, Tim. They were all up there. I'm not sure what the hub is. Why? What's your take on it? Why do you think that part of was such a hub for all the rods? Just because of Lama glass?
The fly fishing side gets heavy influence from the conventional side.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, which we have a very heavy conventional fishing presence, which makes it so that, there's a large population of fishermen. So, I mean, for when you're talking salmon and steelhead, most people get started with a conventional background and then they switch over.
Is that but that's not what you did?
No, that definitely is what I did. Yeah.
Oh, you did? You started with conventional?
Yeah, predominantly. I mean, I started fly fishing real early, but it basically until you've hooked enough fish to get them consistently with fly rods, the learning curve is so slow. So, I mean, yeah, I grew up doing everything under the sun, and I still conventional fish fairly frequently, but it's not,
nice.
Guiding wise, it's predominantly fly fishing. Every once in a while, there'll be a guy that's like, I want to go fish with deer. And I'm like, I can do that. It's not really what I do full time, but I'm down for a change of pace every once in a while.
Yeah, that's great. That's another thing we've heard a lot on this podcast is that, some of the best fly anglers are, have that background in conventional, especially, when you look at steelhead and stuff, because you get a lot more touches, or at least you can, right? A lot more of fish behavior and stuff.
Yeah, the fly fishing side, if you look at it through a gear lens, I mean, like swinging flies is kind of like a combination of swinging spoons and pulling plugs. I mean, realistically, the difference is that you're standing on the bank and not doing it from the boat. But, you're trying to do the same thing. You're trying to get it into a certain depth zone and keep it there for X amount of time. And there's a ton of different variables. But if you look at it through that lens, if you have that background, it makes it a lot more palatable to a lot of people, which it makes sense why, that most people go from conventional to that. Either that or they got started when there's a lot of fish around. If they got started in the mid 2000s or anything before that, you touched a lot of fish and it made it so the learning curve was a little bit quicker.
That's it. Yeah, cool. Well, let's. I want to talk a little more about that area. So you mentioned a few of the rivers. Are those kind of the big ones when you think of Southwest Washington? Are the ones you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you think Southwest Washington, there's the Cowlitz, the Lewis system. Probably the most popular is the Kalama, just in the sense it's kind of like the Wilson on the Oregon coast. It gets a
ton of traffic.
Yeah, it gets a lot of people. Gets a lot of fish though too. It probably has one of the more prolific broodstock fisheries that we have, so it gets a lot of hatchery fish.
Yep, and hatchery fish that are actually have a lot of wild, right? More wild kind of genetics, so they're big. Can be bigger. You've probably seen some big winners out there.
Yeah. I would say that it depends from river to river. I mean, we have a ton of them, anywhere from because like the Cowlitz system, the Lewis system. And then you work your way east all the way into the Washougal, the Wind, all those. The genetics vary very differently. Anywhere where you have a lot of hatchery fish, so like the Kalama, you get a lot of cookie cutter fish that are, your 8 to 12 pounds. But in your more like wild gene pool type rivers, your chance of getting big ones are definitely there. We'll get OP and Skamania quality fish, just like everybody else. But, it's just a matter of putting in your time and
some upper teens type of fish.
Yeah, 20s.
There you go.
Yeah, actually legit 20s and mid 20s. We get big fish, just like anywhere else. I mean, you can't target big fish. You get blessed with them every once in a while,
right.
But they exist for sure.
They exist, yeah. And then what about for salmon? What does that look like and sticking with kind of the Cowlitz, those lower tribs down there?
Yeah. So whenever you're talking salmon, most of the time you're talking about silvers or Coho. We do a fair amount of Chinook fishing too. Like the Lewis, Cowlitz, and Kalama all get good runs of spring Chinook, which can be done with fly rods for sure. It's extremely competitive, which is kind of the biggest turnoff for most guys trying to fly fish for them.
Yeah. And are you fishing on those? Because that's always the interesting thing. Is this something where, because the springers are typically not in the same areas like the fall Chinook, right? So these are fish that are coming in at different times. Maybe the water's lower. Are you fishing like in tidal areas or more up where it's actually just low?
It's completely dependent on the flow. So springers come in starting in, the very, very first ones in the Columbia will start getting caught in February. But realistically, like mid-April is when you start getting them, like with any numbers, in which case you're fishing them in normal winter conditions. It's the water's up and you got that kind of really nice turquoisey green thing going on. But as it gets later, we'll fish them all the way into June. And then, yes, it is getting really low. But for spring Chinook is pretty limited. It can be done for sure. But, if If a steelhead is a fish of 1,000 casts, then a springer is a fish of 10,000.
Oh, it is, right?
Yeah, if you're talking using two-handed rods and swinging flies for them, it's almost all done with, at least in my neck of the woods, it's all done with single-hand rods and varying sink tips depending on where you're fishing and how you're fishing them.
Gotcha. So that's springer. Then what about the I guess the coho? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's streamer fishing. I mean, you're fishing long, heavy sink tips, heavy flies. Silvers are like the bass of salmon. You know, they like heavy structure, lots of wood. It's all done from a boat. You're casting towards the bank and then bringing it towards the boat. Silvers are the most interactive species that we have, in the sense of they'll chase your fly. If they're in the mood, which salmon are moody by nature, you know, but if they're wanting to do it, nobody would fish for steelhead. They're one of the most fun fish to fish for with a fly rod in our neck of the woods, just because, you know, you're constantly casting, your fishing structure, you're looking for rolling fish. It's all the fun parts of indicator fishing for steelhead or salmon or whatever, without watching a bobber.
Right.
But you're casting and doing stuff the whole time. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, that is cool. And what's the window for that one?
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, it's a short, and it's dependent, right? You got to get it just right.
It is, yeah. So the season starts in the beginning of September, but it's a daylight thing all the way up until we get our fall rain. So like this year, we had hardly any rain in October, which made it so the season was 2 weeks. On a normal year, you usually get the whole month of October and most of November, like the early part of November. And then past that, you can get them, but you're kind of double dipping. You're fishing steelhead and silvers, and you're fishing like a couple spots for silvers. And if they're not there, it's not worth your time.
Yeah, which is kind of cool. You know, if you get an opportunity and then you focus on steel. What about the fall Chinook? Is there a fishery there?
There are, yeah. I mean, we have a lot of fall Chinook. It is more like tidal fishing. You know, you're fishing the lower ends of systems. That season's usually a little earlier too. Like Labor Day weekend is kind of the peak of it, is when you're getting, you know, the highest concentration of fish moving through the area, and bright ones, you know, high quality fish. You can fish dark fish. You can still fish them now. And a couple of the rivers that we get really late, like kind of interesting runs of late Chinooks too. Like the Lewis gets a run of Christmas Chinooks that come through, and, you know, they're legitimate bright fish that come in the end of November, early December. Like the Sandy gets that same run of fish though too. It's a really, really small run, but they're there.
Yeah,
you know, everywhere. Yeah. Every once in a while, I'll go out and try and fish for them, and every other year you'll catch a couple, but there's not a lot of them.
Okay, yeah, and none of this really, when you talk about the salmon, it doesn't compare to steelhead because of the length, right? The time you could fish steelhead, you could fish year round pretty much, right, up there.
Yeah, fully. I mean, you can fish year round. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's down times, like I would say May and the very, very beginning of June is kind of the tough part, and maybe even the later part of April. But usually in your down times for steelhead, there's pretty good salmon fishing.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's like in the winter, there's down times too, just in the sense of you're kind of in the middle of runs. Like they're pushy. You're kind of hoping for a good number of fish or good conditions. But they're, generally speaking, yes, you can fish for steelhead year round.
Let On-Demark Lodge give you the Montana fly fishing experience you deserve. The gin clear waters of the Missouri River offer a world-class experience with one of the finest rainbow trout and brown trout fisheries in the world. Whether you're a seasoned angler or new to the sport, their family of guides will tailor a trip just for you. You can head over to ondemarklodge.com to fish one of the great trout streams in the country. Trout Routes is the most comprehensive mapping app for trout anglers. With over 50,000 trout streams, 350,000 access points, public land maps, and more, Trout Routes is the #1 resource for navigating, researching, and exploring trout streams. You can download Trout Routes for free in the App Store today. Just search for Trout Routes on your phone and take your exploration to the next level. That's Trout Routes, TROUTROUTES. Are you seeing up there on, let's just keep it to these three, the Cowlitz, the Lewis, Kalama. Are you seeing more fly guys out there? Is it a lot of fly guys, or is it still just mostly kind of gear?
It kind of ebbs and flows from year to year and how many fish are around like the previous year. If it's a really tough season, then you definitely see more conventional guys the following season.
Yeah.
Um, I would say that you see more fly anglers now than you have in a while, but it's not, it's kind of cyclical. Like it'll ebb and flow for sure.
Somebody goes out there and, a big push or yeah, like there was some good fishing and then, it slows down and people don't catch anything, right? They're probably thinking about whether they want to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's, we had a big influx from COVID too.
Oh yeah.
A lot of people, not necessarily that they got started in this area or, they moved here or whatever, but there was just more fly fishermen in general. There's more fishermen, period. But there was definitely more fly fishermen. But we came off a good season that year those couple of years, especially because, fishing closed for a while and then it reopened and it was really good the following season. So we saw a lot of fly fishermen and then we had kind of a tough year and it ebbs and flows for sure.
Yeah, gotcha. And so, and you hear we've talked a little on the OP and just steelhead in general, the ups and downs. What have you seen? Have you seen that? I mean, does it feel like there's been more fish in the last couple of years or how's that been looking?
I would say it's been consistent. We haven't had the closures that the OP has. So like, I'm about 4 hours south of the OP, but I fish it a lot. I just don't guide it. I try and go up there a couple weeks a year. Yeah, it's an interesting one because the Southwest Washington rivers don't get the same publicity that the Oregon coast, all the ones that you've listed kind of get, which means that they kind of fly under the radar when it comes to closures. For better or for worse. There's definitely been a few years where it's like, yeah, like it probably should have been closed.
Right.
Like, and then other years where it's like, yeah, no, it's right and normal. And I would say on average, it's been pretty good.
Yeah. Okay. And just a perspective for those listening around the country, the cool thing about where this is Southwest Washington is like essentially lower Columbia.
Yeah.
Right. This is dumping into where the OP kind of is not right different. It's dumping into the sound, right? Is that kind of how that works up there, or directly into the ocean? I guess.
Yeah, directly into the ocean. So each one of those rivers has their own estuary versus the Southwest Washington rivers, with the exception. So it kind of depends on where you classify as Southwest Washington. If you live like in Aberdeen or something like that, and you're fishing, like the hump tulips, the Wynoochee, all those like the southern. They get looped in with the Olympic Peninsula closures.
Oh, okay,
so
yeah.
Kind of the separation line. Whenever you're talking Southwest Washington, you're talking about usually the Cowlitz north.
Yeah, that's what I think of it. Yeah, the kind of everything dumping into the Columbia and that Washington side.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and in which case, yeah, so everything flows into the Columbia, and then because of that, you get different migration times. But because you're below Bonneville, fish passage is clear, so you get a fair amount of repeat spawners below. So the Quietness is the farthest river east that gets winter steelhead, even though you can't fish for them. It's closed. It's always been.
Oh, you can't.
Yeah, no, it closes in the end of November and then it opens the 1st of June. So that one just doesn't have a season period, but that's the farthest one east, at least that I'm aware of, that gets any true winter steelhead. But anything below Bonneville means that they can run freely. There's no turbines that they have to go through to outmigrate.
Yeah, the 20 dams upstream that are waiting for the fish migrating up to the Clearwater, right, or anywhere in the upper Columbia. Yeah, it's interesting because we've been doing episodes throughout the whole Columbia, right, all the way up to the headwaters of the Columbia into Canada. But we're down lower, so yeah, there's no dams. You've obviously got all the conventional fishing in the Columbia and commercial, all that, but it seems like it's similar. And then the OP, the difference is it's directly in the ocean. That's where you'd think that one would be the one that would really hold on pretty strong because it's got national park above it, you've limited. But what do you think? I mean, I guess we're talking like, why is that one? I guess it's just the whole Pacific Rim has been kind of hit, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, like I've got lots of buddies that guide up there. Like I'll talk to Trevor Kovich fairly frequently. And, so it's easy to loop rivers in regionally, and it's the way that they're managed across the West Coast. But realistically, each river is its own entity, right? So, and when it comes to regulations, they try and make it so that you can fish rivers that have good populations of fish that are sustainable. But I mean, talking to Trevor, he's like, we've had some of the best fishing that we've had in a while. and it really ebbs and flows. I mean, we've had a lot, whenever you're talking about low runs or high runs or whatever, like the summer steelhead fishing's easy to kind of wrap your head around because the Bonneville is the great decider of how many fish are going through. Winter steelhead, it's all conditions based. Like if you have a really low water period for a long time, not a lot of fish are going through. It gives the optics of the fact that there's no fish, right?
Right.
And then you get a big water event, and then 60-80% of the fish shoot through within the span of a couple weeks. So it's really hard to say how many fish there are. And on top of it, winter steelhead versus summer steelhead, they can be in the river for up to a year or longer, just hanging out there. They spawn within usually like 8-9 months or so of coming in. But winter steelhead, they could be in for a week and then drop eggs and be out. So, you don't, and it's completely dependent on what time of year you're talking about. Your early fish generally shoot up really fast. They're the ones that go way, way high way up in the creeks, like up the upper drainages, and they're some of the hardest fish to catch. Your early December fish, and you don't know like how many fish there are in total. Usually, it's by the end of the season you go, oh, that was a really good year, or otherwise.
Right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, if somebody was sitting here listening out and they're thinking, it's kind of, December, kind of November, December, that period, that range, and they were asking you, hey, I want to go find some winter steelhead, or maybe even to January, what are you telling them?
Early winters is a tough one. Usually I would push towards anything with a fairly decent hatchery plant for consistency.
Which ones would be the consistent hatchery?
The Washougal gets the earliest run of that's the Skamania stockfish. That's what the Great Lakes were stocked with and all that. And those stocks are still pretty prevalent. You do run into some, like in Southwest Washington, we have a wide range of rivers in the sense of whitewater versus fairly easy floats, and access is hit and miss. So like I grew up here. I know property owners. I know, where you can launch a boat, what's safe to go through. I say that because the Washougal has some pretty gnarly whitewater on it, which is why the genetics are pretty pure and you get really high quality fish. That's why that hatchery plant has been pretty successful for a long time. The fish are pretty badass in the grand scheme of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So you can float the Washougal and get to some good water, but you need to have some skills, probably a raft.
You do. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's varying floats. Like the lower river is pretty mellow, but the higher up you go, it gets nasty fast. And there's a lot of private property. The boat launches are gnarly, and that's a pretty constant throughout the whole region.
Right, but there's a good reason why. Again, we talk about this a lot, but the guides. That's why we talk to a lot of guides, because if somebody wants to get into it, they could go do it themselves and go look at the Washougal and any of these rivers. But to do it, probably have a good shot, right? Maybe calling you or somebody else to take you into those spots might be the easier way to have a chance.
Oh, it's definitely the easier way. I mean, there's something to be said for the gratification of doing it by yourself. I mean, it's person by person for sure. But I mean, I would say if you're doing it for yourself, and especially if you don't have a boat, so there's not a lot of places that have like big parks that you can just go walk for miles and fish, beautiful steelhead water to your heart's content. It's a lot of trying to figure out where there's no trespassing signs, and you're driving around going from pull out to pull out.
Yeah. And what are the regulations in Washington? Because they're different in all states, right? As far as high water, do you know the law there?
Yeah, so it's whether or not the river is deemed navigable or not.
Right. Which most rivers aren't, right? Unless it's a bigger, like the Washougal, I'm guessing, isn't deemed navigable.
Yeah. So the easiest thing is whether or not it has a dam or a federal hatchery on it. Then it's definitely navigable. There's a couple of them, mind you. If you were to, for some reason, you got in trouble with the property owner and it went to court. I mean, if it's been surveyed, the case can be made that it is navigable, but you don't really want to do that.
No, you don't want to. Yeah, you don't want to get to go into court.
No,
that's not the good place. It's probably better to like if you see a land, some private property, maybe go talk to the landowner.
Yeah, talk to the landowner. Look on Onyx, try and figure out. The easiest thing is if it's not posted, more than likely the case can be made that it's okay to be on, or at least the property owner doesn't care. If you see a bunch of trespassing signs, I would at the very least talk to them, and even more likely probably just go to the next spot.
Right. Okay. So, but there are some ways if you do your research, you can maybe get in by foot.
Yeah. And being friendly goes a long way.
Yeah. Okay. And on the Washougal, and we'd be thinking like winters, maybe some early winters, like you said, maybe Christmas.
Yeah.
What's that look like if let's just take that example. How are you fishing, that river and kind of the Southwest stuff?
Yeah. It's all, winter steelhead, it's all heavy sink tips and, your normal winter flies, like variations of leeches and stuff like that. Lots and lots of T14 for sure.
Yep. T14, is that your go-to?
In majority, I would say. Yeah, but it's all dependent, obviously, on what you're doing. But generally speaking, for winter fish, getting it closer to them is a little bit more important. But we have good runs of summer fish too. Like the Washougal does get good runs of summers, and they're known for eating dries and full summer steelhead stuff. And across the board, I've caught lots of winter steelhead on dries. Caught lots of summer steelhead on tips. There's no really super constant. Whatever you like to do to make it get it done.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. So you got the Washougal early, and then as you get into the January, February, then you're kind of looking at the other three.
Yeah. The Cowlitz is known as a hatchery river. There's the Toutle system comes into it.
Oh, it does. So the Mount St. Helens, right? That system comes in.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So the Toutle system, it's borderline unfishable because there's a sediment dam up high on it, and it chokes the whole system with silt.
Oh wow!
So there's a lot of fish that go in there, but the fishing for them part is tough.
And this is just because of obviously the Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, which is kind of crazy, right? A long time ago, but there's still lots of impacts you see from that to the rivers.
Oh, definitely, yeah. So there's a lot of logging that happens on the Toutle system. So the Army Corps of Engineers put a sediment dam in there, and it basically made a giant lake above it. And it made it so that the river never really chose a path. So it's just this big holding pond. And because of that, it's never gone down and hit bedrock. So there's just, there's millions of tons of sediment that just get pushed into the system with every rain event.
Right. And what was the thinking there to like not let the sediment out, or why the sediment dam?
Yeah. So I wrote a paper about that in college.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's so that the logging companies don't have to dredge the Columbia at the Port of Longview as much.
Oh, why? Right.
Yeah. So
holy cow.
Basically I think it's 7 years, the grand scheme of how to maintain that dam is just build it higher.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's really well managed.
So it keeps getting bigger. So we're building a bigger, that's kind of interesting too, because you're building a big dam on a river that's pretty much essentially natural now, right? You had this volcano that wiped out the entire thing, and it was kind of recovering naturally, right? Even wild fish were coming back in there and stuff.
Yeah. So it's got two tributaries, the South Toutle and the Green, which are essentially spawning tributaries. But those are the ones that kept it alive, because the actual Toutle itself just got baked. Just tons of volcanic sediment, and it got superheated, so everything got sterilized there for a bit. But because it's got a couple tributaries, it's got fish that returned. The downside of it, and kind of the bummer, is that it was known as a summer steelhead fishery, and before the eruption, and that fishery just doesn't exist anymore because the water gets superheated from that holding pond essentially above the sediment dam, and the water temp will get into the like high 70s or even low 80s on drought years, which your juveniles and even adults can't survive that.
Wow. Okay, so we got the cool thing is, the more we get into this, the more we realize like there is a ton of cool stuff, like interesting stuff going on out here. And you grew up out there, right, in this area? You've been there for a while.
Yeah.
Nice. So if we were looking at January, February, kind of more in that range, where would you be taking us if we were thinking about doing a trip?
Yeah. It's completely dependent on conditions. The Cowlitz is a hatchery fish river. Like I said, so the Toutle comes in, it's got wild fish, but it flows in a ways down. So like the farther down you go on it, there's no like classic steelhead water or anything. It's just kind of a raceway that they just blow up through. Once you get above the Toutle, and like all the way into the section that most people fish, it's just like the Blue Creek stretch and the dam section and all that. It's all hatchery fish. It just is. So, but it is probably the most, I believe that it's the heaviest planting of hatchery steelhead in the state of Washington. They get like 650,000
Oh, wow.
steelhead planted and then 600,000 winners planted.
Dang. Which is kind of cool in to some ways, right? I mean, if you want to get a fish to take home to eat, that might be the place to go, right?
Oh, absolutely. And in terms of there's a couple wild gene bank rivers that we have. So like East Fork of the Lewis and the Wind and all those, your places that don't get a lot of fish. But the nice part is that any river that gets a heavy hatchery planting takes the majority of the pressure. So you kind of need your sacrificial rivers to make it so that your wild rivers can thrive. Otherwise, there's just too much pressure on them.
Yeah.
You have X amount of fish and a lot of people fishing for them. So it's nice to have a couple places where people can go and know that there's good numbers of fish that kind of arrive on normal guidelines from year to year. And that there's also places where you can go that you're like, I don't know if I'm going to get one today, but I'm not in a boat race with somebody else for the entire day.
Right. Are you, for the most part, floating rivers? Or are you doing a little bit of both, walking, wading?
Yeah. If I'm fishing personally, I do a lot of just bank fishing, but just for a couple hours or something, just because I'm local. But whenever I'm guiding, it's out of a boat.
And what's your boat? What's your boat of choice?
I have an old 79 Avro.
Oh, Lavro. Yeah. So fiberglass.
Yep. And then I have an Aire Puma, which is small.
Like a puma.
Yeah, which is, meant for throwing over guardrails and...
Right, like 11-footer or something like that?
Yeah, it's the short one, 11 and a half.
Nice. Wow, that's cool. Yeah, so you got both boats, and the fiberglass is nice, right? Because you can kind of just slide down stuff and scrape it. It's pretty quiet. Do you like, the fiberglass?
Yeah, no, fiberglass, so I don't weld.
Right.
Aluminum boats, there's a lifespan with all boats for sure, but fiberglass, I mean... Like I said, my boat's a 79. So me, my dad, my grandfather, we've redone it several times now. And you can prolong life if you're proficient with working with fiberglass and epoxy. And you can modify it and stuff too. Like the boat that I have now looks very different from the original factory specs.
No kidding.
Oh, yeah. Just tons of work done on it, which is why I like fiberglass. But, person by person, if you talk to anybody who's working the Deschutes, like aluminum reigns king. Everybody loves the aluminum boat over there. At least all the guides. But it's kind of funny. There's pockets of different taste for sure.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, the fiberglass, and it's pretty cool. We did a drift boat series a while back and did a bunch of interviews with boat brands, and it was pretty cool to get the history.
Oh yeah,
including the some of the stuff on the Grand Canyon with those drift boats that are the dories that are going doing the crazy stuff. But but cool. So you got a boat, and obviously that's helping you get away. A couple boats getting you away from some of the traffic. And it sounds like just conditions January, February, you're going to go wherever the conditions are right. Let's just take it to the Kalama. It's prime time. You're finding a spot. Describe that a little bit. What's a day look like out on the water on the Kalama?
Let's see. So peak season would be probably like mid-February through the end of the winter steelhead season. So mid to late April. It gets a lot of fish. It does get a lot of people. I'd say your average day up between 5 and 10 boats that'll float on it. But usually there's enough fish to support that kind of pressure. It's heavily on the gear side for sure.
How do you deal with that? You mentioned that earlier. How do you, when you get a bunch of pressure and you're out there with fly, what's your tips there on making it a successful day?
On my end, usually because you've been working it for, say a couple weeks prior, so you kind of know your familiar faces. The guides that are out there frequently, your recreational guys that seem to be out there as much as they can be. I know what sections of river they like to fish and kind of who's getting out early and what they like to do. That's where being on the water all the time really helps. You don't have to be there at the butt crack of dawn every single time. I'd say the guys that are wanting to do that are very successful. But for winter steelhead, there is something to be said for giving it a few hours, letting the water temperature warm up a little bit, letting it get a little brighter outside so your visibility is better. Generally speaking, the lower and clearer it is, the more competitive you have to be because they have unlimited visibility and your easy fish get caught quick. So it does also depend on like who you have in your boat. If you've got guys that struggle a little bit more, you do have to get competitive with it a little bit more so they have a really good shot. If I've got guys that I've been working with for years and they're excellent fishermen and they've done it with me before, they know what we're going to do, then we can tinker with it a little bit.
Tinker. Okay. And are you guys kind of out there finding spots, parking, swinging flies down, or is it out of the boat?
Yeah. I mean, I'll run indicator trips occasionally. It is extremely effective. I personally I don't really care how we fish for them. You know, when you're talking about guiding, you're completely centering your day around what the person wants and what they expect out of the day. So if the goal is to catch a bunch of fish, then we'll use techniques that make it so that they catch a bunch of fish. But not to say that swinging flies is less effective. The difference being is that you're slow. Like, you know, you're working through a piece of water a couple steps at a time. So you have to be at the right place at the right time all day long. Which if you have somebody with mobility problems or something like that, you know, usually you have to kind of manage expectations and be like, hey, we're going to be moving a little bit slower than usual. So we're going to get into the best places. And if you want to swing flies solely, which I'm all for, just know that our chances are a little bit lower. Not to say we won't catch anything. That's my job. Like I'm really good at putting you on fish, but you know, we might not see a bunch of fish. We might see a couple.
Right. That's expectations. And that's what a good guy does, right? That lets them know. And if you get some guy that's like, man, I want to catch as many as possible, you know, maybe indicators or maybe even gear, right? Might be the thing. If somebody was like, hey, I want to gear fish or whatever. But
yeah,
if somebody's like diehard, you know, I would really want to catch a winter steelhead on a swung fly.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, and you're in the Kalama is the river that day because maybe conditions are right. You're hitting the Kalama and maybe hitting a couple spots, maybe 2 or 3 spots hard.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on how proficient your angler is. I mean, like when you're talking about swinging flies, you know, I'm not fishing, right? So I'm a professional pointer.
Yeah.
They live there. I've caught a lot of fish there. And if you have a guy that's really, really fast and efficient, yeah, I mean, we'll be fishing, like actually fishing all day. You know, you'll fish half a dozen to 20 spots in a day. If you have somebody who's really creeping through spots, then yeah, we'll go right to the really good ones that hold a lot of fish and hope that there's players in there on any given day, and then kind of change it up accordingly depending on, you know, if people are catching them in other areas or, you know, if you need to switch things up, you kind of go with the flow a little bit.
Do you want to be a holiday hero this year? Well, listen up. Jackson Hole Fly Company is spreading the joy with an offer that'll make your wallet and your favorite angler happy. If you spend $50 right now, you get a $10 gift card. It's like fishing for deals, and the fish are biting. From rods that feel like magic wands to reels that purr like kittens, they've got everything to make someone's fishing dreams come true. And those combo kits, they're basically happiness in a box for any skill level. You can head over to jacksonholeflycompany.com right now and catch these deals while they're hot. That's jacksonholeflycompany.com. Let them know you heard about them on this podcast, and have a happy holiday season. On the Kalama, I mean, all these rivers are big, long. What would be the recommendation? Is there a resource? Where would somebody figure out like where to maybe put in, maybe go? Do you have any, without like pointing out to exact spots? You know, what would you say there?
The normal float is so there's a big ass red barn on it, and there's a lot of put-ins and takeouts on the Kalama, and the Kalama, Cowlitz, and the Lewis all are your pretty palatable fisheries. Like there's lots of put-ins and takeouts. They're pretty easy to find, you know.
And there's tons of water, right? I mean, whether you're low down near the Columbia or up towards, you know, you name the spot. I mean, how many miles is it? It's fishing water.
So the Kalama specifically, I believe that it runs about 60 or 70 miles up.
Okay.
Yeah, it comes off of the foothills of St. Helens, kind of. It comes out of an aquifer, just like, you know, the Metolius or something. It just kind of pours out of the middle of nowhere. So that's an interesting one. That one's mostly groundwater, but it's a fairly long drainage. The Cowlitz and the Lewis are very long drainages. They're a lot like the North Umpqua, honestly, like in terms of how big they are, what volume they get fished at. They have dams on them, but the Lewis is dammed really low. It's only like, I think it's about 20 miles from the Columbia, so there's not a lot of gradient to it. And then the Cowlitz is dammed about 40 or 50 miles up. So it's got some more speed, which is why the Cowlitz is a little bit more, palatable for most fishermen, because they're, oh, this looks like a steelhead spot, versus the Lewis it kind of looks like a big slow salmon hole the entire.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Which is good too, right? In some of those areas.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, especially if you're fishing for both salmon or steelhead, it's nice to have all kinds of different.
Have one of those. What was Simon's? I know we had him on a couple times. He was talking about his, I'm not sure if he's still in that area, but what's his river? Is it the Lewis? He has one that he goes down, fishes a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So Battleground is right next to the East Fork of the Lewis, which, it holds the state record for, it was caught in the 80s. It's known for big fish.
What was the record? The steelhead?
Yeah. Yeah. It was like 38 pounds.
Oh, wow. 38 pounds.
Yeah. Mind you, that gene pool of fish has been long extinct for a while now, but you can still get them in the 20s, and I'd say 20s fairly.
Yeah. Okay. So East Fork of Lewis.
Yeah. It's a wild gene bank river. It doesn't get a lot of fish. I'd say, an average winter run is about 1,500 to 2,000 fish, which is not a lot. Your other rivers like Cowlitz, the Kalama, all those will get, north of, the Cowlitz gets north of 10,000 and sometimes even 20,000, depending on a good year. So there's just a lot more fish to fish for.
Yeah, a lot more.
Yeah.
Well, let's just take a perfect condition. So winter fishing conditions are perfect on all these rivers, at some time. Which one are you fishing if it's like perfect?
I have a tendency to not like to stick in the same place for too long. Just if the conditions are perfect for any length of time, I like to bump around, mainly just to keep your finger on the pulse of seeing how everything's doing. But they all have their day in the sun. If you're talking conditions wise, it's whenever you're coming off a big rain and you're right on that like happy medium mark where it's not dirt low and gin clear and not really, really high and blown out or any kind of turbidness to it. The time of year has more to do with it. A lot of these rivers close earlier than even like the Olympic Peninsula rivers or anything.
Like March?
Yeah, March 15th. And before that, everything's fair game. So you're talking like the month of February up into that first 2 weeks of March, we're trying to fish all of them just because so the East Fork, the Wind, like all of those close March 15th. And then after that, you're left with the Cowlitz, the Lewis, the Kalama. Actually, those are the only three that stay open. So it is dependent on kind of what type of conditions you're dealt.
Yeah, I got you. Okay, so let's just take that. So Cowlitz, Lewis, Kalama. This is later. Maybe this is in April.
Yeah,
all of them have great conditions. Are they all pretty much equal, or is there one that swings better?
The Cowlitz swings the best by far.
It does. Okay, so the Cowlitz is the one that swings the best.
Yeah. It also gets the most pressure
with the fly.
Conventional, big time.
Okay.
Yeah. The Cowlitz and the Lewis you can run sleds on. The Cowlitz is very consistent in the sense that it gets a lot of fish, kind of just like salmon fishing, say mid-February, the fish are there. Like there's a fishable number. You can catch them year in and year out. They come about the same week or so versus like your wild rivers. It's more conditions based. Like if you get a high water event or a low water event, it might vary within the span of a couple weeks or a month. The Cowlitz, it's big. There's nothing stopping them. So they come at about the same time every year. But with that, you could have anywhere between 20 to 50 sleds on it.
Right. Just going up and down, like just zipping by all day.
Yeah. And there's a very heavy guide presence. The heavy hatchery plant subsidizes the guide fishery. So in terms of fly fishing, the water style is gorgeous, but it can be a little off-putting with how many people are fishing around you. But just in terms of like, if you're going and you want to be in a really nice piece of water that has fish in it, the Cowlitz is it.
The Cowlitz, okay. And then you got the Lewis and the Kalama, and those are those a little less of that type of, kind of busy traffic with all the guides?
Yeah, the Lewis is very similar. It's ebbing and flowing. There's a program on it, just like on the Clackamas, where they truck wild steelhead above all the dams so they can spawn in their natural habitat, which they've been doing that for about, I think it's like 10 or 15 years now. And it is helping the run size. It's predominantly wild fish from that program, but there is like a hatch box program where there's a few wild, essentially broodstock fish that come in. that you can keep, but there's not like a lot of hatchery fish. It's almost all wild fish. But with it getting better in the last, say, 5-ish years, there's a lot more people that are coming out and fishing it. And because you can run sleds, it is kind of turning into the Cowlitz, where there's a fair amount of people and it's kind of competitive. The Kalama is the nice one in the sense of it's all drift boat and raft pressure, and it gets a lot of fish. So the only thing is, you're in a smaller river. It's more competitive in the sense of, you have to time boats floating versus sleds running up on you. So if you're swinging flies, then you try and figure out where the pressure is on any given day. If it's really busy, I mean, sometimes we'll launch late and go way after people and let the fish settle. Depends on how many fish are around. If it's been pretty scratch and, that one's the only one on the table, then it's get out early and fish everything as fast and as efficiently as you can, and just, clobber water and hope that you can find fish.
Yeah, right. Gotcha.
Yeah, but it changes a lot. I mean, like I said, Southwest anything below Bonneville, you've got so many different runs that are happening at so many different times with different genetic variations of fish that go different places in the system.
There's something going on.
Yeah. I mean, there's always something.
Yeah, there's always something. Okay, so that's a clear picture. So the Kalama is the one that, it's a little bit different there. This is pretty cool because I think we're getting a high level picture of this. And if somebody was, again, thinking like, okay, I want to be planning for this, where would you send them to kind of get more information on all this? Go to, like, is there anything online or any places where they can maybe chat with some people or get some more intel if they're kind of doing it themselves?
There's a couple clubs. So there's Salmon Creek Fly Fishers, and then there's Clark Skamania, which, they're a wealth of knowledge for sure. There's a lot of guys that have been living here for, decades, and they've spent a lot of time here, and they're really good wells of information. I would also say the Portland Fly Shop is a really, really good one. All the guys that work there, with the exception of a couple dudes, live in Southwest Washington.
Oh, they do. Yeah.
Like Jason guided this area for years.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, let's definitely give a shout out to Jason because we've had him on the podcast. We'll put a link to that episode. And it's pretty cool because, he opened up the shop right downtown in Portland. And he's just, he's just a cool dude. And but he's got a ton of the Southwest Washington stuff. So we'll send people in there or pick Jason's brain. And also, like with a trip, right, for you, if they wanted to connect, they can just go to the Portland Fly Shop. Yeah.
The Portland Fly Shop, or just, they can DM me over Instagram. That works too.
Okay, good. So this has been great today. Well, let's start to take it out of here pretty quick. This is, we mentioned it before a little bit, kind of our shop segment. We've got a small community where we got some people that are building trips in there. We call it the shop, kind of a throwback to the old fly shop as well. But today, this is presented by Togiak River Lodge, which we're going to be heading up there this next year, fishing for hopefully Chinook, which is pretty exciting for me because I think that's one species that's kind of been down in Alaska, right? In a lot of areas, but we're hitting that. And I know you have a little bit of it. We talked about at the start. So first, shout out to Togiak Lodge for those that want to check out a good Chinook run. But you were also on the Connect Talk, right?
Yeah.
Fishing for Chinook. How was that when you were up there? Was that this last year?
That was that would have been the summer of 24.
Oh, so yeah. So how was the Chinook up there this year?
Oh, it was epic.
Yeah. I mean, that's the place. If you think about the places, Togiak definitely it's in a different area, right? If you go down towards that area and even towards the Kenai, like, I don't even think you can fish in the Kenai anymore, but the Connect Talk, there's some of these areas that still have strong runs, right?
Yeah. Your main ones are the Nushagak, the Connect Talk, and then the Sandy and the Hoodoo. Those are your big three when it comes to, swinging flies for kings. And it's awesome.
Yeah, it's good. I always kind of go back to the Alaska thing with Coho I love catching fish, but Coho can be, you catch so many on a fly, right? Stripping it, that it's almost like, well, how many do you need to catch?
Yeah.
Is that kind of how Chinook is? Do you ever get tired of catching Chinook swinging flies?
No. No, you don't.
What about this one? So this is a question that keeps coming up we've got In the Bucket, our other podcast where Brian Niska is hosting that. And he talks to a bunch of people that are way above my level. But, that's always a question that comes up, like Chinook, Steelhead. You can only pick one. Which one is yours?
From a guiding standpoint, I'd say Steelhead through and through. They're more consistent. Your run timing is a lot longer, so you can actually make a living off of guiding Steelhead.
But if it was just like the day, like it's just no guiding. It's like you got one fish for the rest of your life to fish for.
Still Steelhead. They eat dry.
Yeah. Yeah, they eat dries. Yeah, Chinook aren't eating dries, are they?
Not very consistently. We did it a couple times, but it's really hard to get them to do it with any
Really?
consistency.
How'd you get them to eat? What was that? How'd you get them to eat it dry?
New fish coming off of the tide. They were in a very specific situation where you could actually do it. But I mean, that's not how I would recommend fishing for them unless you really want to get frustrated. But I mean, yeah, the big thing about Chinook fishing is whether or not you're catching bright fish. Like you can catch dark Chinooks all over the West Coast, especially when you're talking fall fish. But, when you're talking about fishing like the, what's the one? The Kitimat.
Oh, yeah.
The Togiak, all of the Alaskan rivers. The goal is fishing for bright fish and preferably good size ones, at which there's not very many things that are better. I mean, fishing really cool big flies for the potential of a really large, bright, hot fish is awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome.
Yeah. Bring your bug spray when you go to Toad.
That's right.
It's legit.
That's right. Yeah, the bug spray is good. Good.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. I think, and we'll take it out here with this segment. We mentioned kind of the travel. You've been around a little bit. Do you have, what that trip, that bucket list place you haven't been to yet you're thinking about? I mean, there's with the world in front of you, any other places?
Yeah, the list continues to grow the more places that you go.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm talking about like kind of extravagant adventures, it's a saltwater fishing for me now. Once that you've fished for salmon and steelhead from, your Northern California all the way up through Alaska, you do start to realize that a lot of rivers fish very similarly and stuff. It's kind of fun to go to a different place and have it feel like a different planet.
Right. What's your salt species that you're into?
I've done a lot of pelagic fishing, anywhere from like Gulf of Mexico, and then I've done like Hawaiian stuff. I've done a fair amount of stuff out of like Cabo.
Okay. What would be a spot like that you haven't been to that you want to, it's on the list?
I was talking to a guy about doing a trip to Sudan.
Oh, wow. Sudan. Yeah. For permit?
For GTs and triggers.
Oh, okay.
Mind you, that was before the war broke out. I was either going to do that, but then I got the offer to go to Alaska. And so I was like, it's either, spend 10 grand and go on a trip or go and make a bunch of money and be in a really cool place. And I chose that one.
Yeah.
But, that's high on the list, flats fishing is awesome. I've done like the Ascension Bay thing out of Ascension Bay Lodge. It was a trip with Reddington. And it was awesome. I mean, shots at permit and bonefish and tarpon and the whole 9 yards.
It's pretty hard to beat.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible. Being on white sand beaches and fishing coral reefs and stuff. I don't care where you are. It's fun no matter where.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, I want to get a couple of tips out of you. We haven't gone deep on like all the technical. I mean, we've done a ton of episodes on Steelhead, and I never get tired of it. And we do have a lot of technical tips from probably a lot of the guys you know of, including Trevor. But we can maybe get you on and talk more about that. But today, what would they be that? So somebody's on the river. Maybe it's the Cowlitz, maybe it's the Kalama. They're there. What are you telling that person if they're swinging flies that's going to give them more success?
So if you're just getting started with it, definitely get to the point where your casting is consistent. Like, you don't want to be shooting it out and then it's 10 feet farther, 10 feet shorter every single time.
Right.
The angle is constantly off. So make it consistent. You don't have to be a crazy caster. I'd say you can get it done with about 40 feet of running line 90% of the time. So that just makes it so that your angle is correct and you're swinging at the right speed. It's not to say that you can't catch them with just the sink tip out. It kind of spot dependent, but if you can get about 40 feet of running line out, like every single time at the exact same angle, you will catch fish. Now, that being said, it's dependent. And, if you're with me, I'm hanging over your shoulder going, all right, 10 degrees down, 10 degrees up, make it so that it's holding in certain places. But yeah, just make it consistent. Don't step super fast. Don't step super slow. Just everything is nice and consistent the entire time. The difference between a really good steelhead day and a really bad steelhead day is whether or not you fish the water effectively, not whether or not you hooked a fish. Because like if you fish all day, but you fish the water really, really well, they're not there. You did your due diligence and everything was consistent. Now, at the end of the day, if you're like, that one middle section of that spot that I really thought looked good, I just couldn't get my out. I was having a hard time waiting, all that kind of stuff. It's going to linger in the back of your head. You're like, was there one there and I missed it? That's the only thing you can control is make sure that your fishing is consistent.
Exactly. How do you hold it? So if you're on a run, you're swinging, you say, hold it there. How would somebody do that? Like I think you mentioned, if you're swinging a fly and you find maybe a bucket, how are you slowing it down or holding it in a little section or getting that, if you've got that bucket where you think there's a fish, how are you making sure to get it to the fish?
I'm a big proponent of longer leaders and heavier flies, generally speaking. It does depend on how deep you're fishing, but a lot of these rivers, you're fishing spots that are north of 6 to 8 feet deep, which does mean that you need to get down quick. So if you're fishing a heavy fly and a long leader, the fly sinks faster than your sink tip no matter what. So your fly will get down to depth and then essentially your sink tip catches up, which also means that stepping after you cast versus stepping before does play a role. Like some guys will throw a big reach mend in it or something like that. It works in certain places, but it's all, you're talking about like where the spot is in relativity to what angle your cast is at and how fast your sink tip and fly can get down to it. If it's, you're casting out in a more traditional spot, but the primary holding lies within the first 5 feet of the swing, you're trying to get your stuff down as fast as you can and try and get it to hold there, which might mean that you move with the swing to get it so that it slows down in the current. But, the opposite can be said for if the spot is on your side and you're swinging into it, you want it to go really slow. So you kind of hold up and then fish it, 1 or 2 steps at a time. Generally speaking, you want, if there's a very obvious spot that a fish is going to be, there's a big ass rock and it's like right in front of it's got a really nice pushy section and he's going to be right there. Spend some time on it, make the same cast twice. Like if it's very obvious that is the highlight of the run, highlight it, fish it.
Yeah.
And then
that's it.
Rush through the rest of it.
Yep. Yeah. And then part of this is just, you can definitely get out with a guide and learn some water or, do it yourself. You just get out and cover water, right? You're going to fish runs and eventually you're going to hook up with something and then you'll know, okay, there's a spot. Do you find that, these rivers that we've talked about today are for the most part pretty consistent in any given year? Like that run where you hooked up, that spot is there the next year?
It can be. Usually if it changes, say you get a big flood event or a landslide or something like that, and it fills in, it's usually obvious that the hole has changed, but look for similar water. If something fills in and that exact spot that you're fishing doesn't fish quite the same, try and find something that looks similar. Because if it held fish once, it'll hold it again.
Yeah. And how would you recommend people would find those fish if they're out there, they're floating down, they're not quite sure? Are you just looking like, what's your recommendation of trying to read the water?
Yeah, fish as much as you can.
Yeah, just cover the water. Yeah.
I mean, if you're there on the perfect day, right, with a lot of fish around and they're cooperating, awesome. Everything's easy, but you take the good with the bad for sure. I mean, the more that you fish, the more consistencies you're going to find and learn from the fishermen around you, right? Like the conventional side is the very effective side of fishing. If you see those guys catching fish in places that you're not fishing with consistency, maybe you should figure out how to fish that.
Right. And are the conventional guys fishing out there kind of the same water that you would be fishing for the most part? I guess if they're fishing with spoons and stuff like that?
Can be. Yeah. They have the ability to fish deeper and more effective. So, but that being said, when it comes to steelhead fishing, steelhead hold in steelhead places. So your conventional crowd is still fishing the same water to a certain degree, but it does change from place to place. Like, there are some places where you'll notice that gear guys are catching fish in places that are hard to target with fly rods. Not to say it's impossible. You just have to really be technical about how you get your fly to them. But like I said, just pay attention to them. Like if you're seeing them catch fish in places that you haven't even like sniffed all day long, maybe you should try it a little bit. That might be where they hold on that particular day. And also you'll learn something for the next time you go out. You'll have something else to kind of go back on. If you're doing the same thing over and over again and it's not yielding anything, switch it up.
Yep. Switch it up a little bit. Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, this has been good, Jackson. I think that, there's a lot of, we could probably pick your brain a lot more. I think I'll respect your time and let you get out of here this morning. I just want to give a shout out to Shandy. She was one of the people that recommended we connect with you. I mentioned she's been out there kind of, in the group here and doing some cool stuff. So shout out to Shandy. I think she's been on a trip with you.
Yeah, Shandy's fantastic. Yeah, I fished with her this fall. She was hanging out at Nick Wheeler's place for a little while, so we got out for a day and had a great time.
Right on. So that's one good shout. And give us, before we get out of here, we always love to get a little bit of music on the way out the door. Are you more listen to music or podcast when you're kind of driving to your next spot?
Oh, it's a lot of music for me.
Yeah. What do you got playing in are you like Spotify or how do you listen to your music?
Yeah, I'm using Spotify. It's been a lot of like indie rock.
Okay. What's the definition of indie rock?
Yeah, like kind of it's got more of a synth tone to it and a little bit slower, but honestly it changed.
Yeah. We could probably do that. Could we do that in Spotify? Just put in indie rock and something will pop up.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Maybe we'll just do that. I'll try that this morning. As soon as I get off this, we'll all plug in our Spotify indie rock and see what happens.
Yeah. It's nice and mellow. Driving to the river music.
Good. Okay. Cool. All right, Jackson. Well, like I said, we'll send everybody out to Portland Fly Shop. They check in with Jason there or check you out on Instagram, Jackson Golik, if they want to connect. And yeah, thanks for all your time today, man. This has been a lot of fun. I love we've haven't talked a lot of tips and tricks, but we got the whole rundown on the area. And I'm excited to hopefully get maybe a few people connecting with you down the line. And yeah, thanks for all your time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Dave.
All right, quick call to action for you. Head over to the Portland Fly Shop right now if you're interested in booking a trip with Jackson, getting some more information. Jason and the crew at Portland have an awesome thing going there. If you want to flatten your learning curve, you know how to do it. You can also check in with Jackson on Instagram if you want to get a shot at some of these fish. If you're in the area or even if you're outside, this is a great chance to get some Chinook, Coho, Steelhead on the fly. Everything he's got going is amazing. All right. Also, if you can, whatever app you're on right now, one call to action would be for you to follow the show. You can also send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com. I would love to hear from you if we haven't talked yet. And if you follow that show, you will get the next episode delivered to your inbox. And that next episode is coming up next week. Early on, James from Schultz Outfitters is going to be here, and he is going to tear it up next Monday. If you're interested in smallmouth bass, this is a trip we're doing, but this is also an epic episode where he's going to break through everything. So if smallmouth are on your menu for fishing, not for eating, maybe they're for eating in some areas, but if they're in if they're on your menu for fishing, this is a good one. Monday, check it out. All right, I hope you have a great morning, a great afternoon, or great evening. Even if you're right now, if it's evening, late at night, hanging out, listening to this podcast episode. Maybe you're just getting ready for bed, potentially. Maybe you're just tying up that last fly before the trip in the morning. You're getting fired up for steelhead. Big trip is coming up, and you want to get that last fly tied. If that's you right now, I want to wish you a good day tomorrow, if it's evening time. And I'm excited to see you on that next episode. Thanks for stopping in today.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.